Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. In today's video, we're going to talk about one of my favorite weapon systems, and unfortunately, one that was never installed on the Iowa-class battleships. That is the 3-inch 50 caliber gun. Like the main battery of a Des Moines-class heavy cruiser, these guns are also automatic, and it's a really excellent weapon system that the United States developed at the end of World War II and deployed in the post-war years, which was better at shooting down aircraft like kamikazes, and then by extension, newer aircraft and early jets, which were too fast-moving or too large to be shot down by the traditional 20 and 40 millimeter guns that the U.S. Navy relied on during World War II. We are on board the cruiser USS Salem, which is a museum ship open in Quincy, Massachusetts today. Salem was designed around 1943, laid down in 45, and commissioned in 1949. So she's a World War II design, commissioned into the post-war world, and she shows a lot of the major developments that the U.S. Navy learned during the war, and then planned on retrofitting into older vessels, but unfortunately with the Iowa-class battleships it never happened. Some changes were made to add these guns, but the ships were decommissioned between 57 and 58, well, 55 to 58 if you count Missouri, and they were never installed, although depending on the ship, mounts and directors were installed, and in some cases 40 millimeter guns were taken off. So the 40 millimeter gun has a 2-pound projectile. The 3-inch gun is throwing a 13-pound anti-aircraft projectile, which can have a VT fuse. So it's much more effective at engaging aircraft. Early in World War II, the 3-inch guns were the manually loaded type where you've got to drop the breech block, throw it around, aim it, fire it, and do all of that manually. So they weren't fast enough firing. Some of the Pearl Harbor battleships had them because the U.S. didn't have a good medium range anti-aircraft gun at that time, and they didn't do much good. So we don't see too many 3-inch guns in the anti-aircraft role during World War II, although they are deployed on some classes of ships as the main battery, primarily submarines and some of the destroyer escorts. But in the post-war years, when they figure out how to load them more automatically and get the rate of fire up, the idea was always to swap these mounts out with 40 millimeter mounts on a 1-for-1 basis. So a twin 3-inch gun can replace a quadruple 40. There's also a single 3-inch gun which can replace a twin quad 40. In theory. In practice, the weight ended up being a little bit heavier than planned, so they were going to be replaced on a 3-for-2 basis. So 3 40 millimeters removed and 2 3-inch guns installed. This would have left the Iowas with somewhere between 12 and 14 of these guns, had that design actually been carried out in the late 50s. And we've got a video where I've talked about that design. It's one of my favorite upgrades for the Iowas that never happened. That's also linked in the video description. Des Moines-class cruisers have an absolutely fearsome anti-aircraft battery. They were built with a couple of 20 millimeter guns, but those were pretty quickly removed. Next up, we've got the 3-inch battery. They were designed with 12 of these twin mounts, 2 forward, 2 twin mounts forward, 2 aft, and then 4 on each side amidships between the 5-inch battery. They have their own directors and are deadly effective. Then they have the ubiquitous 5-inch 38, which the U.S. Navy found to just be an awesome weapon during World War II, and so they just retained them and continued to use that weapon system well into the 90s. And then they also have the 8-inch 55, which, believe it or not, can be used as an anti-aircraft weapon at long range. And they even had fuses that they could put on the high-capacity rounds to make them explode in front of aircraft and destroy them. In fact, the cruiser Newport News claims that they use their 8-inch guns to shoot down a North Vietnamese MiG during the Vietnam War. It's not entirely confirmed, but makes these ships monstrous in an anti-aircraft capability. The 3-inch gun has its own director associated with it, the Mark 56. And this director has blind fire capability, which means the aircraft's pretty far away or in dark weather or fog and whatnot, and you can't specifically look at it. The radar can still acquire the target and fire at it. It's a really effective radar system for this gun, and the fact that these ships have the directors for the main guns, they've got the Mark 37s for the 5-inch, and then they've got the Mark 56s for the 3-inch, shows just how important radar fire control became for the U.S. Navy, that all these systems have their own directors and can engage individual targets or all concentrate on one target that you want taken out of the sky incredibly quickly. Unlike the Quad 40s that were just bolted on around the ship and could keep their ammunition relatively close and transfer it relatively easily, the 3-inch gun is much more like a 5-inch gun in that it has its own magazine, its own dredger hoists, and its own handling rooms. These are not very different from the 5-inch guns. It's just a slightly smaller projectile, but the dredger hoists were designed to take all sorts of ammunition. So, here is one of the scuttles where the dredger hoist would send a 3-inch round up. I absolutely love that the cruiser Salem, that they've got a heating boiler on board. Obviously it gets cold here, so they heat the tour out. And I absolutely love that they repurposed this scuttle for their heating instead of cutting a hole in the deck somewhere. Like that's really good museum stewardship, in my opinion. You've also got ready service ammunition lockers nearby your guns so that in wartime you can keep some stuff loaded in there, and while the rest of the gun crew is getting around, the first guys can start preloading the gun. These things have a magazine of sorts, so if you can get a couple of rounds stacked up in there, it's really going to improve your rate of fire over time. So after getting the shell from the ready service ammunition locker or from one of the hoists coming up through the deck, you first place it in one of these 5-round revolving drums. It's weighted so that it will always drop with a shell in the bottom position, so that the loaders up in the gun can always reach to the same place. They're not trying to reach to different places in the cylinder. And then from there, they've got the feed ramps into the gun, which can also hold 5 shells. So this gun actually has 2 cylinders. The guy's taking the ammunition off of the hoist, loaded into that cylinder in the back, and then somebody else is taking the ammo and putting it into this feeding tray. And each barrel has 2 feeding trays, one on each side, that are interlinked so that they alternate. That way, if you are shot out of ammo, you've got time to catch up, but really you can have 1 round feeding in there and then 2 more rounds stacked in here that are going to interlock. And this thing, not quite 1 round per second, but it's definitely quicker than 1 round every 2 seconds. So these guys need to have a lot of ammo being passed to them. And remember, this is heavier than the 40 millimeter clips that you could just drop in. Unlike any other ship I've ever been on, the 3-inch guns on Salem have pits all around them. You know how ships love to have pits of death? Star Wars rules. Anyway, these things have so many spent casings that they're spitting out that it would clog around the gun. So they've got these pits that they can sweep it all into and save those casings for later. And this one's got one on each side and the outboard face, so that however the gun is turned, you can put it in there. This gun is special because unlike a 40 millimeter gun, say, which can turn a certain distance and then has to come back and often has mechanical stoppages in it to stop it when it gets too close to the superstructure, this gun can rotate 720 degrees. What do I mean by that? There's only 360 degrees in a circle. The cabling and wiring that comes into this, because it's all power. You can slave this directly to the Mark 56 director, and wherever the director points, this will just slew automatically, regardless of what the crew's doing. The crew can manually do it like an older 40 millimeter, but if it's slaved to the director, it just automatically turns and shoots. Because it's got some extra cable down there, it can turn 2 full circles in case it's tracking a target around. That's really useful for, say, the guns on the bow. Up here in the superstructure, that causes all sorts of problems, because if the gun turns too far, you're firing into your own superstructure or your director or the other guns around you. These things have electrical interlocks that, if they turn too close to the ship, will prevent the firing circuit from closing. So it's not like the 16-inch guns on the battleship, or the 5-inch guns for that matter, where if they turn too far, there is a physical buffer that hits a casting to make it stop, so you can't turn it into the structure. These do that all electrically. So we're just a couple years beyond World War II, and already things are getting far more sophisticated. Do you think the Iowa-class battleship should have gotten 3-inch guns like these in the late 50s like designed? Or do you think it would have been a waste of money since by the time the Iowas are brought back into service, they're obsolete? Let us know in the comments section down below. Salem has some really incredible weapon systems on board that are near contemporaries to Battleship New Jersey, but always a generation ahead. Make sure you visit her in Quincy, Massachusetts. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, and also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. Consider supporting the cruiser Salem and helping with the great restoration work they're doing on her. You can support Battleship New Jersey by liking, sharing, and subscribing so that more people find out about our channel and what we do. Thanks for watching.